we entering a new age of virtual instruments with AI modeling? Today I'm going to look at just the first foray into this by Ace Studio. Now, Ace Studio has been building a Swiss Army knife of an AI-powered audio program for a few years now. And they're probably best well known for their AI voices, as well as their voice changer, their stem splitter, all that kind of stuff. Now, they're adding their first AI instrument, a violin. And as someone who loves playing with all the latest toys, I'm going to run it through its paces in this video. Like I said, this first instrument is a violin, which was modeled by Italian composer Gabriele Boschi. Real quick, let me run through just a couple of quick disclaimers. You'll see a mention of expression controls coming soon, and more instruments coming soon. So really, we're looking at a version 1.0 here, and I have high hopes for what it's going to grow to be in the future. Okay, so let me move over to my Ace Studio interface, and I'm going to click on the AI Instruments tab, and there you will see that new violin by Gabriele, and then you'll also see a Vintage Violin 1, Vintage Violin 2. I'll compare those later in this video so we can see what the differences are. So just to get started, let's get rid of that Ember Rose track. That's one of the voices in AI Studio. I'm not going to be touching the voices today, but I'll probably do that in a separate video because I'm very curious about them. And instead, let me double click on Gabriele to create a track. And actually, I'm going to create 3 more while I'm at it. Now that I have 4 tracks of Gabriele's violin, next I'm going to drag in a MIDI file I found on the internet. It is Bach's Violin Sonata number 3. It's an excerpt from the second movement where there's a fugue, and I know already that there are 4 violin parts in this MIDI file, so this will give us a really nice chance to see how this instrument behaves in a chamber context. So right off the bat, you do see that question, do I want to apply the tempo and signature from the importing MIDI file? Yes, I most certainly do. Also, let me come up here to these icons and enable Track Control Panel and Mixer so I can see more of what's going on with these instruments. Now, right off the bat, before I even hit play, I know that if I'm doing a chamber quartet here, I'm going to want them panned out in stereo space. So I'm going to click each one and just move them a little bit because we can't have 4 violins literally, sitting on top of each other in virtual space. We got to spread them out. And now that we've got them spread out, I think it's time to just hit play and let's see what this sounds like. Okay, so that was literally just the first playback with absolutely no tweaking of expression or extra control. I am quite impressed with the raw sound of those violins. It's not quite to the stature of a real solo player yet. The yet is a big asterisk on this because just imagine where this technology might be in 6 or 12 months. But the thing I'm most impressed in is I didn't have to do any manual labor in terms of telling it how I wanted it to play. It interpreted the musical phrases, and I would say it actually did quite a good job at that. In terms of fidelity, I would give the fidelity maybe 7 out of 10, let's say. It does sound realistic. It sounds like a violin to me. It also doesn't sound like $1 million instrument here. This is not Stradivarius quality. I also find that I'm missing just a little bit of the air of the performance. It still feels a little bit closer to MIDI than it does real. But that's something I'd actually like to play with because, especially in this style of classical, Baroque classical chamber music, just feeling the room that it's in is an extremely important thing. So I can see that this violin defaults to 10% reverb. I'm going to up that a little bit. I'm going to go to maybe 25. I'm going to turn that up on all the violins, and let's just see what that sounds like. There's the 4th violin turned up to 25. Let's rewind and play the same excerpt one more time. Okay, I won't go ahead and play the whole thing because I think we get the idea. For me, that certainly already made it feel more real, that I actually heard it within a space and not just within a confined fake setting. You know what? As long as I'm here, we should also try 0%, just in case there's people out there who might want to use this violin, but be able to either put their own reverb on it, or they just want a very dry effect. Let me go ahead and hit play on a 0% reverb of the same piece. Yeah, removing the reverb certainly brings the sound closer to you and makes it more immediate. And in certain styles of music, that could be very useful. Or maybe you would want to use this within your own sequencer and then apply your own reverbs and spacings to it. That's also possible. So overall impressions, I'm quite impressed with what Ace Studio is able to do with modeling a violin. Now, I would say the closest cousin to this technology that currently exists would be Note Performer. Note Performer is a special plugin developed by Vollander Instruments. I've done a separate video on it. I'll link it below. That sits inside a notation program and allows you to render an orchestral recording with a reasonable degree of realism with zero tweaking. And again, it uses a bunch of algorithms to ascertain the way that a player might interpret those notes on the page, much like this is doing. So overall, I would say this is quite a successful experiment. Now, I'm very curious to hear the other violins. So I'm going to replace Gabriela's violin with Vintage Violin 1. And I'll tell you what, I'll do a little bit of editing magic here. I will go ahead and play this, but I'm going to edit it together so that you hear Gabriela's and then Violin 1 and then Violin 2 back to back so you can actually compare them. So stay tuned for this. I would say that experiment is quite interesting. I did notice that with both the Vintage Violin 1 and 2, the sound is a little more grainy. They both have slightly different characters to them. I think Gabriela's violin is superior in almost every way, but that's not to say that Vintage Violin 1 and 2 wouldn't be useful in other contexts, or perhaps for layering. And layering is exactly the last thing I want to try in this video. I'm going to switch all the tracks back to Gabriela's. And then I'm going to explore this feature that I haven't really played with yet, but if I go back to the instrument tab, I can see that right here there's an ensemble parameter. And if we go back to the first track, what happens if I click add? And it looks like I can add multiple copies of Gabriela's violin. I don't know if it's possible to add, oh yeah, I can add the other violins too. So let's just try an experiment here where we do 2 Gabriela's, 1 Violin 1, 1 Violin 2, and that's all playing the first part. And then I'm going to do the same thing for the others. So 2 Gabriela's, 1 Vintage Violin 1, 1 Vintage Violin 2. And then, of course, I'll repeat the same process here. 1 of these, 1 of these, and 1 of these. And finally, for the fourth part, 1 more Gabriela, 1 Vintage Violin 1, 1 Vintage Violin 2. So what I would expect now is when I play this back, I should hear 16 violins. Now, there are controls for offset here and spread. Presumably what these things mean would be how far offset can the timing be just to move notes a little bit apart from each other. Because the reality is, if a computer models the exact same instrument the exact same way on top of itself, all you're going to get is not much difference, or you might actually get some phasing between them. So I think the offset and spread parameters are there to create a little bit of differentiation within the 4 violins of each section. So without further ado, let's listen to 16 violins using 3 different types of violins play the same Bach piece. Okay, I need to stop it right away because I noticed that it's already overloading, and that's probably just because we have so many instruments playing. So I'm going to turn each of these down by about 10 dB, and that'll give us a little more headroom to play with. But you know what, as long as I'm here, I also want to turn the reverb back on because I think that's going to be a vital part of making this feel like it's being played by a real ensemble. So let's go back to our 20% on all 4 violin sections, or 19%, close enough. And here we go with a new rendering of this Bach. So I found that a really interesting experiment. Does it sound like a symphony orchestra? No, it can't possibly. Also, we only have violin as of right now. Presumably, you can see up in the corner that there's a more instruments coming soon designation. Like I mentioned earlier, at the bottom of the screen, you can see expression controls coming soon. So in the future, you will be able to do a lot more manipulation of this kind of programming. So again, back to my question, that didn't really sound like an orchestra, but it's not a bad take at a chamber group, I would say. I didn't hear too much phasing, maybe just a little bit. And certainly if this was buried in a mix with the right type of reverb added, this could probably be a fairly good rendering of the Bach. So overall, my conclusions, this is really something. We don't yet have the fine degree of control that we would if we were using, for example, an advanced key switch sample instrument. But then to be fair, if we were using one of those things, we would be putting a lot more time into the programming and the tweaking of it, whereas this just rendered it with absolutely no customization. I think it's pretty impressive that the algorithm is able to take just raw, basic MIDI and render it with some semblance of expression. Sonically, I find it pretty good. It's not yet to the level of some of our best sampled instruments, nor a real player, but I would say it's incredibly promising technology. Again, just imagine what this will be like in 6 months or a year or 2 after this technology has matured more. Now, overall, Ace Studio is a really impressive suite of AI and algorithmic music tools. In this video, I haven't even touched on its other features like its AI voices, or the voice generator, the stem splitter, or any of that stuff. In fact, I may come back to that in a later video, so please leave a comment below if that would be something of interest to you. I think however you look at it, this is incredibly impressive technology. Maybe in the near future, we would have an entire orchestra that could be rendered this way. And this might end up being a very serious competitor to Note Performer, for example. I did a separate video on Note Performer and exploring its realism. Check that out if you're interested, I'll leave a link below. Now I do want to say a quick note about the legal and ethical side of AI because it's a really hot topic being debated right now. I've also spent a lot of time talking about this topic in other videos, and there's more coming, of course. In doing my research, it does seem like Ace Studio is demonstrating a very strong commitment to ethically sourcing the raw materials that they're using to train their algorithm. Meaning, the source recordings of the voices and the instruments they use are under contract to them, are being compensated by them, and it's a legitimate business transaction. And with those recordings and that training, they're giving us a program that can help us render our music. Now, this is a completely different world than other companies out there that are operating in a much grayer area, that are literally generating new pieces of music that are culled from copyrighted works without consent, compensation, or credit. So I hope I've made it clear, Ace Studio is not in that category. I'm pretty excited to see where this is going to go in the future. This is just their first AI instrument, and clearly there's going to be a lot more coming soon. It seems like every time I turn around nowadays, there's new AI tools hitting the market. And I'm keeping a running list of ones that I'd like to investigate. Please drop me comments below if there are ones that you think are particularly worthy of exploration or commentary or testing. And likewise, I'd love to hear from you if you agree with my conclusions or if you completely disagree. Let's keep the conversation going. Please do like and subscribe. You know that helps every YouTube channel out there when you interact with it. I really appreciate you watching this. I'll see you on the next one.